All right, full transparency. I was 100% going to pull out the Williams merch for this one, but after what we saw today, I'm not sure that's the move anymore. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. We're here to talk about the 2025 Austrian Grand Prix, what happened on Sunday, and what can we take away before F1 heads to Silverstone next week. We're here to talk about everything that happened over the course of the weekend. We'll begin with our quick hits. We'll transition into our weekend winners and losers. We'll go over the predictions that we made before the weekend began, see how we did, and then we'll wrap things up by talking about what we're going to see next week. Let's go ahead, jump on into it. As we get started with our quick hits, I don't know where else you can really start besides just talking about how much McLaren absolutely dominated this weekend. I think it was pretty clear from the jump that this was going to be a McLaren weekend, far and away. And I think it blew it out of the water even still. Lando Norris took pole by half a second thanks to a Pierre Gasly spin at the end of his lap, but regardless, it was a very, very clear McLaren runaway as Oscar Piastri then transitioned into taking second place behind Lando Norris in the Grand Prix itself. I mean, they were a good 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, however many seconds ahead of Charles Leclerc, who came home to finish in third. So it was a very, very strong McLaren performance. Lando obviously converts his pole to a win. Now, there is some questions to be had in there about Oscar's run-in with his old former team, but regardless, it is a 1-2, a Lando Norris win and Oscar Piastri P2. So honestly, at this point, it was good for Lando to get another win. I think he needed it more than almost anything to kind of start getting back on the winning track, finishing ahead of Oscar and cutting into Oscar's championship lead just a little bit. Now, on the other side of that coin, Oscar obviously, minimized the damage as much as possible, finished just behind Lando, still has a 15-point gap ahead of him in the championship, but it's become very, very clear at this point that this is truly a two-man race, and they both come from the same team. So hopefully it stays exciting. We'll see where it goes. I think next we have to talk about Ferrari. Now, besides the qualifying snafu and who got impeded by who and who got impacted by what, obviously you got to hand it to Ferrari for being there to take advantage. Charles Leclerc ended up starting P2 in this one before ultimately losing the position to Oscar at the beginning of the race, like I mentioned. But even Lewis Hamilton starting this one in P4 and managed to finish the race in P4. So a very strong weekend from Ferrari. It was definitely nothing too crazy or out of the ordinary, but they had decent pace. They made okay-ish strategy decisions that didn't hurt them at least too much. But at the end of the day, a 3-4, I don't know what more you could really ask for from them on that. Let's talk about the Kimi Antonelli situation. Obviously, he locks up going into turn 3 at the beginning of the race and ultimately takes out both himself and Max Verstappen from the race. It was one of those moves that you could see that it was never really on. I think he just got caught out in the braking zone, swerved down to the inside to avoid, running through. I believe it would have been, probably Gabriel Bortoleto, I think at that point. I can't remember who exactly was in front of him, before ultimately just locking up the rears and the fronts and just going full slide all the way into Max Verstappen. I'm honestly surprised more people weren't taken out at the same time. So I think this is the first real instance of Kimi's rookiness really kind of showing out. This was the first big high-profile mistake like this. At least from what it sounds like, seems like Max Verstappen took it pretty cleanly, and so I know he always likes to try and give the benefit of the doubt to the rookies. So at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's unfortunate for both of them. I think Kimi is going to carry a 3-place grid penalty up to Silverstone, as well as he gained 2 penalty points on his super license. So he's going to learn his lesson from this, I hope. Ultimately, it is what it is. Let's talk Liam Lawson, finally getting on the board once again with a very, very solid result here in Austria. Finally qualifying seems to have come to him a little bit. Now, Austria is one of those sort of get-right qualifying tracks, but at the same time, you got to put it right and you got to put it there in a hurry. And so obviously Liam making it into Q3, starting the top 10, finishing in the top 10 with Isaac just outside the points at the same time. Good weekend for Liam. Seems like he's finally warming up into the 2025 season. Is it a little too late? Who knows? But at the same time, it's nice to see him finally get off the snide a little bit and finish in the top 10. We got to talk about Sauber, double points in this one. Obviously, Nico Hülkenberg continuing his dominant run in Formula One, starting literally last in P20 and finishing in the points in P9. A fantastic race from Nico. Gabriel absolutely came into the weekend absolutely on fire, was rapid from the jump, and converted his first Q3 appearance into his first points finish of his career. A very, very good result for him and Sauber. So I keep predicting that Sauber is going to fall off, but apparently they've just turned into the GOATs. So congrats Sauber on the fantastic weekend. And then I'd be remiss as a Haas fan not to mention Esteban Ocon starting from P17, finishing in the points this weekend, obviously going from P17 to P10. Ollie Behrman also just finishing outside the points in P11. I think he kind of got caught out in a really short first stint on the soft tires. I think he only did about 10 or 11 laps before pitting onto the hard tires. I think that just kind of put him a little too out of sync with everyone else, but at the same time, he made some pretty decent moves over the course of the race, and so good experience. I'm sure he would have loved to be in the points, as I would have as well. But if you're going to finish P10 and 11 as a team, I guess there's not much more you realistically could have done about it. We also got to talk about the Carlos Sainz situation before we head to weekend winner and loser. Carlos Sainz fails to get off of the grid. It seems like he must have had some brake issue, as once he returned to the pit lane to make his pit lane start after missing the formation lap, his rear brakes caught fire, and it was just seemed to be a lot going wrong. They ultimately ended up pushing him back to the garage before ultimately retiring him from the race, so he gets a DNS on his card. A very unfortunate time for Carlos. It seems like you just cannot get a break this year, or even the last few weeks if you're talking about Williams. Obviously, his teammate Alex Albon also just silently, retires from this race as well, a handful of a dozen or so laps into the races, and so it was just a tough run for Williams and a very, very tough string of weekends for Williams, to say the least. A couple of quick notes from around the way as well. Franco Colapinto gets himself a penalty for having an incident with Oscar Piastri that probably ultimately kept Oscar from really challenging for the win, as well as Yuki Tsunoda gets a penalty for spinning Franco Colapinto. So a couple of connected events there. The dive bombs down into turn 4 were plentiful, and a lot of incidents occurred. So a couple of things there. Other than that, it was a pretty interesting race, but ultimately it was a McLaren 1-2, Charles Leclerc P3, and a little bit of excitement up and down the grid. Some good moves. Austria, always a good time. All right, let's move on to our weekend winners and losers, and they feel pretty obvious. For weekend winner this week, I'm going with Sauber. It's got to be a double points finish for the team. Nico Hülkenberg going from literally last to points in this one, with Gabriel Bortoleto looking like he has been up to speed like never before. Jumping into the weekend, immediately on the pace, fantastic qualifying, his first Q3 appearance. Nico Hülkenberg running about as perfect as a race you could from last to finish in P9. So not only just to finish in the points, but to finish solidly in the points as well. So a fantastic result for Sauber, and couldn't ask for much more if you're them. Kind of a very similar story. I feel like the weekend loser is pretty obvious and straightforward. I'm going with Williams this weekend. After starting the season absolutely on fire with Alex Albon, it seemed like he was finally going to recover after a couple of tough weekends in a row. Ultimately, with Carlos Sainz DNSing and Alex Albon silently retiring from this race along the way. A tough run of form for Williams, who I am sure are looking forward to getting back onto home soil for the British Grand Prix this next weekend. And man, I hope for their sakes they finally get a good result and Carlos can actually either run a race, Alex can actually run a race, they don't have to manage these issues. I, for one, would love to know what they're dealing with, but at the end of the day, all we can go is based on what we've seen, and this weekend was one of the tougher ones to watch. So I'm sorry, Williams, but you are my weekend loser. All right, let's get down to it. Let's talk about the predictions that we made before the weekend began. We'll begin with my pick for biggest positive surprise. I went with Ollie Behrman this weekend. I thought that Ollie was going to be able to come into the Red Bull Ring, a track that he has had success at before in F2 in the younger seasons, and so he has had some experience around this track. Jumps into the Haas this weekend, out-qualifies Esteban, finishes just outside the points. But unfortunately, Esteban, who started behind him, finished ahead of him and in the points. So I don't think that I can give him the points on this one. But at the same time, it was a solid race for Ollie. Would just love to see just a little bit more. So starting off on a bad foot as we move on to biggest disappointment. As I mentioned, we're talking about Sauber for biggest winner. I thought that it was impossible for Sauber to continue on the run of form they've had. I think it's pretty impressive that they managed to do it, and so I predicted Nico Hülkenberg as my biggest disappointment, who's finished in the points a few races in a row. I thought it was only a matter of time before we got a classic Sauber weekend. Unfortunately, not only did they not happen, they got a double points finish and Gabriel Bortoleto's first points of the season. So very much no points for me on that one as well. Let's move on now to my qualifying predictions. I had a Lando Norris pole position, a Max Verstappen P2, and an Oscar Piastri P3. P3. Actually cooking and qualifying for once. Lando Norris did in fact take pole position, but unfortunately it was Charles Leclerc who started P2 and Oscar Piastri came home in P3. So I get 2 points for qualifying, one of my better qualifying predictions on the way, especially considering it wasn't a McLaren 1-2. So keep that in mind. As I'll move on now to my race podium. I thought we were going to see some incident this weekend between Max and Lando, maybe even separately, but I just felt like there was something in the air before the weekend began. They have history at Austria. I thought maybe something was going to happen. So on my race podium was a Oscar Piastri win, a George Russell P2, and a Charles Leclerc P3. So thankfully, with Max's failed qualifying and his DNF, I actually don't lose any points by keeping him on my podium, and I actually get Charles Leclerc dead on. Unfortunately, Oscar Piastri finished P2 in this one, and Lando Norris won. So 1.5 points for me there. And then finally, my one crazy prediction. I predicted that Max would be leaving Austria with a 1-race ban, obviously playing on my podium prediction that potentially something was going to happen between him and Lando that ultimately would land him that final penalty point that he's been trying to avoid. Ultimately, Kimi Antonelli took that out of his own hands at turn 3 on the opening lap, so unfortunately, it was never to be, apparently. Who knows what would have happened had Max Verstappen survived. So there we have it, 3.5 points on the card for me this weekend, all centered entirely around qualifying and race podium predictions. No cooking was had anywhere else. But if we take a look at our new standings for the championship, we have Senel, who is absolutely opened up a massive lead over the rest of us with 46.5 points. I finally settle into second position with 36 points. We have British TTG with 34.5 points. F1 Inferno is now on 32 points. Andrew with 24.5 points, rounding out the final position. So we have to start making some moves if we're going to try and catch up. The F1 season is nearing the midway point, and it's time to make our move. Hopefully, we'll be a little better next week, and maybe Senel could finally take a weekend off from getting almost everything right. My guys, what is next in Formula One? That's right, it's the British Grand Prix, one of I know I say this a lot, one of my other favorite races on the calendar, the British weather, the Silverstone track. It just breeds craziness and absolutely stunning results. Last year, we saw Lewis Hamilton win the British Grand Prix for the umpteenth time in a row in an emotional win, his first win since 2021. It was an absolutely unbelievable race to watch, and I, for one, can't wait to see what happens this year. It's going to be his first in the red of Ferrari. Can he do it again? Only time will tell. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comment section below. But there we have it, guys. What did you think of the Austrian Grand Prix? Let me know down in the comment section below what rating you would give it out of 10. And how did your predictions fare before the weekend began? We'll be back in only a few days for our predictions for the British Grand Prix. And if you're interested in joining our community predictions championship, you can head to the link down below, join the Discord. We'd love to have you join our little community. I hope to see you there. But guys, for now, that's going to do it for me here in this one. And I'll see you guys in the next one.